The notification came through at 3:17 a.m. That soft blue light illuminating my face in the darkness of our bedroom, our empty bedroom. I'd fallen asleep waiting for him again. The message was from American Express, confirming Richard's purchase. 2 business class tickets to Paris, departing next Friday. 2 tickets. Not 1. Not 3. 2. I remember how the screen blurred as tears welled up in my eyes. My thumb hovered over the notification, trembling slightly before I opened it. I didn't want to know more, but I needed to. 15 years of marriage had taught me to recognize the patterns, the signs, the quiet betrayals that happen in the shadows of what you thought was love. Richard hadn't mentioned any trip to Paris. Not over dinner 3 nights ago when he was unusually attentive. Not yesterday morning when he kissed me goodbye and said he'd be working late, again. The second ticket wasn't for me. It had never been for me. I sat up in our king-sized bed, the one we'd picked out together during happier times, and wrapped myself in the duvet as if it could shield me from what was coming. The house was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator downstairs. Outside, a light rain had started to fall against the windows, each drop a tiny percussion instrument playing the soundtrack to my unraveling life. Paris, I whispered to myself, tasting the bitterness of the word. It was where we'd honeymooned 15 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me, Richard returning to the scene of our beginning for what felt like our end. I wondered if he'd take her to the same little cafe on Rue Claire, where he'd promised to love me forever. Would they walk along the Seine at sunset, his arm around her the way it used to be around me? I opened my laptop and logged into our joint account. The evidence was all there in cold digital clarity. 2 tickets, purchased in both their names. Richard and Melissa. Melissa, his marketing consultant. Melissa, who had been at our home for dinner just last month, smiling at me across my own table while her foot probably played with my husband's under it. My hands didn't shake anymore. Something cold and clear was crystallizing inside me, replacing the hurt with something harder, something with edges. I walked to the bathroom and stared at my reflection. 43 years old. Laugh lines that had deepened into something more permanent. Hair I'd stopped coloring during the pandemic, now streaked with silver. When had I started looking so tired? When had I become someone my husband could discard so easily? But there was something else in my eyes that night. A spark I hadn't seen in years. A determination. I wasn't going to scream or throw things or beg him to stay. I wasn't going to be the hysterical, discarded wife. No, I was going to be something else entirely. I pulled out my phone and took a screenshot of the ticket confirmation. Then I opened my personal email account, the one Richard didn't know about, and forwarded it to myself. Evidence. The start of something. That night, I didn't call him to ask where he was. I didn't text to see when he'd be home. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at our kitchen island, planning. I thought about our history, playing it backwards like a movie in reverse. The gradual cooling of his affection. The business trips that grew more frequent. The way he'd stop mid-conversation when his phone buzzed. The perfume I occasionally caught on his collar. Never mine. I thought about our daughter Emma, away at college, who idolized her father. How carefully he'd cultivated his image as the perfect dad, the successful businessman, the devoted husband, all while systematically betraying everything we'd built. By the time dawn broke through the kitchen windows, bathing our granite countertops in pale gold light, I knew exactly what I was going to do. It wasn't rage driving me anymore. It was clarity, the kind that only comes when you've finally seen through all the lies you've been telling yourself. When Richard came home that morning, apologizing for falling asleep at the office, I smiled and kissed his cheek. "You work too hard," I said, sliding a cup of coffee towards him. He looked relieved, grateful even for my understanding. He had no idea that I had already made a phone call to my own travel agent while he was showering. No idea that I'd booked my own ticket to Paris. Seat 4C, right next to 4B, his seat, with Melissa in 4A by the window. The game had begun, and for once, I was the one writing the rules. The week before their flight was the most surreal performance of my life. Every morning, I'd wake up next to Richard, make him breakfast, kiss him goodbye, all while knowing Each night I'd listen to his stories about work problems and client meetings, nodding in all the right places, while a voice inside me whispered, "Liar, liar, liar." On Tuesday, he told me he had to go to Chicago for an emergency client meeting. He'd be gone until Sunday night. "It's terrible timing," he said, his face a perfect mask of regret as he packed his suitcase. "You know, I hate being away this long." I sat on the edge of our bed, watching him carefully select ties, the blue silk one I'd given him last Christmas among them. "I understand," I said, handing him his travel toiletry bag. "Business is business." That night, after he left, I opened a bottle of wine and called my sister Claire. I hadn't told anyone yet. Saying it out loud would make it real in a way I wasn't ready for. But I needed someone to know what I was planning. "He's taking her to Paris," I said after my second glass. "On Friday." The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought we'd been disconnected. "Jess," Claire finally said, "are you absolutely sure?" I laughed, but it sounded hollow even to my own ears. "I saw the tickets, Claire. In both their names. First class. Hotel reservations at Le Meurice. A suite. The same hotel where we stayed on our honeymoon." "That son of a bitch," Claire whispered. "What are you going to do? Confront him?" "Better," I said, and told her my plan. "That's insane," she said when I finished. "But also, kind of brilliant. Are you sure about this?" Was I sure? No. I wasn't sure of anything anymore. Not of my marriage, not of my future, not even of who I was without the identity of Richard's wife that I'd carried for 15 years. But I was sure of one thing. I deserved the truth. All of it. And I deserved to reclaim my dignity on my own terms. "I'm sure," I told Claire. "I need to see it with my own eyes. I need them to see me seeing it." The next day, I went to the bank and withdrew $15,000 from our joint savings account. Not enough to raise red flags with Richard, but enough for what I needed. I opened a separate account in just my name. Then I contacted a lawyer, one Richard didn't know from a firm across town, and scheduled a consultation. Just exploring my options, I told the receptionist when she asked about the nature of my visit. That night, I stood in front of my closet, considering what to pack for Paris. What does one wear to confront a cheating husband at 35,000 feet? I selected my most expensive pieces, the designer dress he'd bought me for our anniversary, the cashmere sweater that brought out the green in my eyes, the shoes that made me stand taller than I felt. On Wednesday, Richard called from Chicago. "How's the weather there?" I asked innocently. "Cold," he said without hesitation. "Typical Chicago winter." I pulled up the weather app on my phone. Chicago, 52 degrees and sunny. Unusually warm for February. "Sounds miserable," I said. "Stay warm. I miss you," he said, his voice softening in that way that used to make my heart skip. "This trip feels longer than usual." I bit back the words that threatened to spill out. Instead, I said, "I miss you too. I'm thinking of visiting Emma this weekend since you're away. Maybe drive up to campus and surprise her." "That's a great idea," he said, sounding relieved. She'd love that. Another lie to add to the collection. He knew I wouldn't be able to reach him while he was supposedly in Chicago if I was with our daughter. Clean alibi on both sides. Thursday night, I packed my suitcase with methodical precision. Clothes, toiletries, passport, and one item Richard didn't know I had, a small, high-definition camera disguised as a pen. Claire had helped me order it online. "Just in case," she'd said. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Richard and Melissa laughing together in Paris, walking hand in hand under the Eiffel Tower, making love in a hotel bed paid for with our money I had helped earn during the lean years when his business was just starting. Money that was supposed to be for our retirement, for Emma's wedding someday, for the future we had planned together. I gave everything to them. I whispered to the darkness, and they discarded me like I was nothing. Friday morning dawned bright and cold. I took an Uber to the airport 3 hours before their flight was scheduled to depart. I needed to be settled in my seat before they boarded. I needed the element of surprise. As I checked in, the airline agent smiled at me. "Traveling to Paris? How lovely." "Yes," I said, returning her smile with one of my own. "I'm meeting someone there." She had no idea how true that was. I'd never been good at chess, but Richard was. He'd tried to teach me during the early years of our marriage, always emphasizing the importance of thinking several moves ahead. The beauty of the game, he'd say, eyes gleaming with that intensity I once found so attractive, is that your opponent never sees the real attack coming until it's too late. Ironic that his own lesson would become his undoing. My preparations had begun months before I even knew about Paris. I'd sensed something was wrong, but couldn't quite name it. Call it intuition or self-preservation. But I'd started gathering information. Subtle digital breadcrumbs that most would overlook. Last summer, when Richard accidentally left his laptop open, I installed monitoring software that forwarded his emails to a secret account. Not to spy, at least that's what I told myself, but to protect our family if my suspicions were correct. I never checked it, letting the information accumulate like silent testimony to what I wasn't ready to face. Until now. Seated at gate C-17, watching passengers mill about, I opened that email account for the first time. Hundreds of exchanges between Richard and Melissa dating back 18 months. Hotel confirmations, late-night messages, photos I wished I could unsee, plans for their future, a future that conspicuously didn't include me. But the most damning evidence wasn't the affair itself, it was the financial trail. Richard had been systematically moving money from our joint business account into a separate one. Small amounts at first, then larger transfers as he grew bolder. He was planning an exit strategy, cushioning his new life while leaving me financially vulnerable. What he didn't know was that I'd already spoken to our accountant Marcus 2 weeks ago. Marcus, who'd been with us since we started the business in our garage. Marcus, whose daughter I'd helped get into college with recommendation letters and tutoring when she was struggling. Marcus, who looked at the numbers I showed him and shook his head in disbelief. "This isn't just unethical, Jessica," he'd said quietly. "Some of this crosses into illegal territory, especially the client billing discrepancies." Marcus had already prepared a full financial report for my lawyer. Richard thought I was the creative one, the people person who didn't understand the business side. He'd forgotten that I had an MBA gathering dust while I raised our daughter and supported his career. I checked my watch. 1 hour until boarding. I pulled out my phone and sent 3 scheduled emails set to deliver automatically in 24 hours if I didn't cancel them. 1 to our company board with financial evidence, 1 to our daughter with a gentle but honest explanation, and 1 to Richard's parents, who had always treated me like a daughter, expressing my regret at how things had ended. I wasn't being vindictive. I was being thorough. Next, I called Detective Ramirez, an old college friend who now worked in financial crimes. Our conversation last week had been illuminating. "Everything's set," she confirmed. "Just send the text when you're ready, and we'll move forward." "Thank you," I said, feeling a strange calm settle over me. "I know this is unusual. 15 years of friendship merits unusual," she replied. "Besides, what he's doing is textbook fraud. We would have caught it eventually." I ended the call and checked my appearance in my compact mirror. I'd visited the salon yesterday. Cut, color, style. The woman looking back at me wasn't the faded wife Richard had been neglecting. She was polished, confident, purposeful. I applied a fresh coat of lipstick, Chanel Rouge Allure in Pirate, a bold red I'd stopped wearing because Richard had once commented it was too much for me. My phone vibrated with a text from Claire. "Plane landed yet?" "Not yet," I replied. "Boarding soon. I'm ready." "Remember," she texted back, "you're not just doing this for yourself. You're doing it for every woman who's ever been made to feel invisible." I smiled at that. Claire, ever the feminist crusader. But she wasn't wrong. There was something larger at stake here than just my marriage. It was about reclaiming my power, my voice, my future. The gate agent announced pre-boarding. I gathered my things, taking special care with my carry-on, which contained a sealed envelope of documents my lawyer had prepared, divorce papers, financial disclosures, evidence of fraud, all ready to be served at 35,000 feet. I had also packed Richard's favorite whiskey in a TSA-approved container. Not as a peace offering, but as part of the plan. Richard always drank on flights. It calmed his subtle fear of flying, another secret he thought I didn't know. As I moved toward the jetway, I spotted them. Richard and Melissa arriving at the gate, his hand casually resting on the small of her back, in a gesture so intimate it took my breath away. She was laughing at something he said, her head tilted up adoringly. He hadn't looked at me that way in years. They didn't see me. They were too absorbed in each other, in their secret excitement, in the romantic getaway they thought they were about to enjoy. I boarded first, found my seat in 4C, and settled in. I arranged my things carefully, positioning the hidden camera pen in my jacket pocket. Then I ordered a glass of champagne from the flight attendant who was welcoming business-class passengers. "Celebrating something special?" she asked with a professional smile. I took a sip and felt the bubbles dance on my tongue. "You could say that," I replied. "Today is the first day of the rest of my life." She had no idea how true that was. As I sipped my champagne, I watched the cabin door, waiting for my husband and his mistress to board, completely unaware that I was 10 steps ahead in a game they didn't even know we were playing. They boarded during the final call. I watched Richard guide Melissa down the aisle, his hand protectively at her waist, whispering something in her ear that made her giggle. It was the same laugh I'd heard at our dinner table when she'd complimented my roast chicken, now ringing with a different kind of intimacy. I took a steady breath and raised my champagne glass slightly, just enough to partially obscure my face as they approached row 4. Richard was checking the seat numbers, smiling, completely oblivious to what was about to happen. "Here we are," he said to her. "You take the window." Melissa slid into 4A, settling her designer bag beneath the seat in front of her. A bag identical to one I'd admired in a magazine that Richard had told me was ridiculously overpriced. Then Richard stood directly beside me, preparing to take his seat. I lowered my glass. "Hello, Richard," I said calmly. The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. 15 years of marriage, and I'd never seen him speechless before. "Jessica?" he finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. How are you?" "Seat 4C, I said, pointing to my boarding pass. "Right next to you." "What a coincidence." Melissa leaned forward, confusion clouding her face until she saw me. Recognition dawned, followed by naked panic. She looked to Richard, waiting for him to fix this somehow. "You need to get off the plane," Richard hissed at me, desperation edging into his voice. "We can talk about this when I get back." "This isn't the place." "Please take your seat, sir," a flight attendant called from behind him. "We need to prepare for departure." Richard sat mechanically, his body rigid with tension. A thin sheen of sweat had appeared on his forehead despite the cool cabin air. "Jessica," he said, lowering his voice to an urgent whisper. "Let me explain. This isn't what it looks like." I tilted my head slightly. "It's not? Because it looks like you're taking your marketing consultant to Paris on our 15th anniversary weekend, to the same hotel where we spent our honeymoon, using money from our joint account." Melissa made a small, distressed sound from her window seat. The flight attendant approached with pre-takeoff beverages. "Champagne for the gentleman and the lady by the window?" "Yes," I answered for them. "My husband and his colleague would love some champagne. We're celebrating, after all." Richard shot me a warning look as he accepted the drink with trembling hands. The flight attendant withdrew, oblivious to the silent battle raging in row 4. "What do you want?" Richard asked, his voice a combination of anger and fear. "Money? Is that why you're here? To humiliate me?" I laughed softly, genuinely amused by his misreading of the situation. "Richard, if I wanted money, I would have just transferred it from our accounts, the way you've been doing for the past 18 months. His face went from white to gray. "What are you talking about?" "The offshore account," I said. "The creative accounting at the firm. The missing client payments. Did you really think Marcus wouldn't notice eventually? He's been loyal to us for 12 years. "You talked to Marcus?" His whisper was barely audible over the engines starting up. "I did," I confirmed, taking another sip of champagne. "And Detective Ramirez. And the firm's board of directors. And our lawyer. Well, my lawyer now." I reached into my bag and pulled out the sealed envelope, placing it on his lap. "Happy anniversary, darling. 15 years is crystal traditionally, but I think legal papers are more appropriate under the circumstances. Richard stared at the envelope, not touching it. Beside him, Melissa had gone completely still, her champagne untouched. "You're bluffing," he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. In response, I pulled out my phone and showed him the email queue set to deploy in 24 hours. Board members, clients, family members, all set to receive detailed documentation of his financial and personal betrayals, unless I canceled them. "You see, Richard," I said quietly, "while you were planning your little getaway, I was planning too. The difference is, my plan doesn't ruin just a marriage. It ruins everything if you don't cooperate." The seatbelt sign illuminated with a ding. I carefully fastened mine, then looked at him expectantly until he did the same. "What do you want?" he repeated, defeat replacing anger. I leaned closer, making sure Melissa could hear me too. "I want everything I'm legally entitled to, plus compensation for damages to my professional reputation by association. I want the house, half the business interests, the legitimate ones, and full transparency about all accounts." "That's ridiculous," he sputtered. "That's more than any court would—" "We're not going to court," I interrupted smoothly. "That would be messy, public, and result in potential criminal charges for you. This stays private as long as you sign. Today, on this plane." The aircraft began taxiing toward the runway. Richard gripped the armrests, his knuckles white. Flying had always made him nervous. "There's a pen in the envelope," I added helpfully. Melissa finally spoke, her voice small and frightened. "Richard, what is she saying about criminal charges? You told me the money was all legitimate." I turned to her with genuine sympathy. "Melissa, did you really think you were the only one he was lying to?" Richard fumbled with the envelope as the plane accelerated down the runway. Inside were divorce papers, financial agreements, and a letter of resignation from the company board, all prepared by my lawyer based on evidence I'd gathered. As we lifted into the air, I watched 15 years of marriage sink into the reality of its ending. Richard read through the documents, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief. "There's a notary in business class," I informed him. "Seat 8D. I met her at check-in. She's agreed to witness your signatures during the flight." "You thought of everything," he said bitterly. "I learned from the best," I replied. "You always told me to think 10 steps ahead." By the time we reached cruising altitude, Richard had signed everything with the recording pen I'd helpfully provided, the same pen that had captured every word of our conversation, every admission, every defeated sigh. When the seatbelt sign turned off, I summoned the notary. In the confined space of an airplane cabin, with nowhere to run, Richard watched as his signature was officially witnessed and stamped. "I'll take a scotch," he told the passing flight attendant when we were done. "Make it a double." I gathered the papers, carefully returning them to my bag. "You can keep your Paris trip," I said. "Consider it a parting gift. I've booked myself on the return flight tomorrow morning." "How generous," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "But," I continued as if he hadn't spoken, "I wouldn't make any purchases on the company card if I were you. Those accounts have already been frozen." The color drained from Melissa's face again. "What about our hotel? The reservations?" I smiled at her. "I'm sure Richard has enough cash for a more modest accommodation. Perhaps something with separate beds, now that you know the kind of man he really is." That was 1 year ago today. 1 year since flight BA2297 to Paris, where I reclaimed my life at 35,000 feet. I'm sitting at a cafe in the 7th arrondissement, watching tourists drift toward the Eiffel Tower as twilight settles over the city. Paris in February has a melancholy beauty. Bare trees, steel-gray skies, buildings the color of pale stone glowing softly in the fading light. I've ordered a glass of Bordeaux and a small plate of cheese, taking my time, savoring each bite. Paris feels different when you're not running from something or clinging to someone. It feels like possibility. After that flight, things moved quickly. The evidence I'd gathered left Richard little room to contest anything. His partners bought him out of the firm for a fraction of what his shares were worth, a courtesy only extended because of their respect for me. I kept the house but sold it 6 months later. Too many ghosts. Too many rooms filled with the echo of what we never truly had. Emma didn't speak to me for 2 months after I told her everything. She'd always idolized her father, and the truth was a bitter pill to swallow. But eventually, on a rainy Sunday afternoon, she showed up at my new apartment with a bottle of wine and tears in her eyes. "I read the emails," she said. "Dad left his computer open when I visited. I saw everything." We cried together that night, mourning not just the end of a marriage, but the shattering of her childhood image of her father. Healing between us has been slow, but genuine. She's here in Paris with me now, though she's off exploring Montmartre with friends from her study abroad program. As for Richard and Melissa, their affair didn't survive the flight. She left him at Charles de Gaulle Airport after discovering just how deep his deceptions went. He returned to a life fundamentally altered, a diminished career, a fractured family, a tarnished reputation. The last I heard, he'd moved to Arizona to work for a distant cousin's small accounting firm. Sometimes I wonder if I was too harsh, too calculated in my revenge. Then I remember the coldness with which he'd planned to discard me, to leave me financially vulnerable while he started fresh with a younger woman. I remember the systematic lies, the gaslighting, the years of making me question my worth while he constructed an elaborate exit. No, I don't regret my actions. I regret only the years I spent dimming my light to make him shine brighter. My phone buzzes with a text from Claire. 1-year anniversary of Operation Paris Takedown. How's the view from the other side? I smile and take a photo of my wine glass with the street behind it, sending it with the caption, "Clear and bright." The waiter refills my glass and asks if I'd like anything else. For a moment, I consider his question more philosophically than he intended. Do I want anything else? After 15 years of wanting what I thought was a perfect marriage, of wanting Richard's approval and attention, of wanting to be enough, what do I want now? The answer comes with surprising clarity. I want this moment, this quiet joy of being completely myself, answering to no one, rebuilding a life entirely on my terms. I've started a consulting business, helping women navigate financial independence after divorce. It turns out my experience, painful as it was, has value for others walking the same path. There's something healing about transforming personal trauma into professional purpose. Emma joins me as the sky darkens, and the Eiffel Tower begins its hourly sparkle. She looks more like me than ever. Same determined chin, same analytical gaze. She slides into the chair across from me, cheeks flushed from the cold. "How was your day?" I ask, pushing the cheese plate toward her. "Amazing," she says, eyes bright. "I'm thinking of applying to graduate programs here." We discuss her plans, the future stretching before her with all its unmarked possibilities. As we talk, I realize that my greatest victory wasn't in the careful execution of my plan or in the financial settlement. It was in showing my daughter that you don't stay when you're being diminished, that you don't accept betrayal as your due, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away, or in my case, book a seat right beside the truth. Later, as we walk back to our hotel, Emma loops her arm through mine. "Mom," she says quietly, "I'm proud of you, for everything, for surviving, for thriving." I squeeze her arm gently, words momentarily beyond reach. The Paris lights reflect in puddles from an earlier rain, fragmenting into thousands of liquid stars beneath our feet. I think about the woman I was a year ago, fractured, frightened, but finding her power, and the woman I am today, whole, moving forward, author of her own story. Some people say living well is the best revenge. They're not wrong, but I've learned something more valuable. Living authentically is the greatest freedom.